The fluorescent lights in courtroom 7B cast harsh shadows across the mahogany benches as Elena Martinez sat in perfect stillness, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild awaiting punishment. The navy blazer she wore was modest, unremarkable, the kind that could be purchased at any department store. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no jewelry except for the wedding ring she would soon surrender. To everyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her husband claimed she was, a woman who had spent 15 years living off another person's generosity. Marcus Chun adjusted his expensive tie and leaned toward his attorney with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own superiority. His voice carried easily across the courtroom as he spoke, each word dripping with condescension. She never worked a real job, he declared to anyone within earshot. 15 years of marriage, and she lived off my paycheck the entire time. His attorney nodded approvingly, making notes that would paint Marcus as the long-suffering provider and Elena as the dependent beneficiary. Whether you're watching from New York or California, you've probably seen this story before. The successful husband, the quiet wife, and the assumption that one person's silence means they have nothing meaningful to contribute. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because this story of hidden strength might hit closer to home than you realize. The memories came flooding back to Elena as she sat there, each one a small knife twist of humiliation she had endured for over a decade. Marcus telling her at dinner parties that she wouldn't last a day in the real world. Marcus explaining to friends that she was lucky to have someone who could take care of her. Marcus laughing when she mentioned wanting to contribute more to their household, suggesting she could maybe get a part-time job at a boutique if she really wanted to feel useful. Judge Patricia Hendricks observed the proceedings with the weary expression of someone who had seen countless divorce cases. The pattern was familiar. Successful professional husband, stay-at-home wife, division of assets that reflected the assumption that one person had built everything while the other had simply enjoyed the benefits. Marcus's attorney was painting a picture that seemed entirely reasonable based on the evidence presented. Marcus's confidence grew with each passing minute. He had prepared for this moment carefully, gathering bank statements, mortgage documents, and investment records that all bore his name alone. His salary as a software engineering manager at a Fortune 500 company was substantial, and he had been meticulous about maintaining control over their finances. Elena had never even seen most of these documents, he claimed, because she had never shown any interest in such complicated matters. The courtroom filled with Marcus's supporters, colleagues who testified about his dedication and work ethic. They spoke about his long hours, his important projects, his crucial role in keeping their team productive. They mentioned Elena only in passing, referring to her as Marcus's wife who stayed home and, as far as they knew, spent her days shopping or meeting friends for coffee. Their testimony painted Marcus as a man who had shouldered the entire burden of supporting his household. Elena's attorney, Sarah Kim, sat quietly during these testimonies, occasionally glancing at her client with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. She appeared to be running a losing battle, representing a woman who had little to offer except claims on half of what her husband had built. The legal pad in front of Sarah contained only sparse notes, and she seemed resigned to negotiating the best possible settlement for someone with limited bargaining power. Marcus's friends gathered outside the courtroom during breaks, their conversations loud enough for Elena to overhear. They joked about how she would finally have to learn what it meant to work for a living. Some expressed mock sympathy for the shock she would experience when she realized how much groceries actually cost or how difficult it was to pay rent without someone else's income. Marcus basked in their support, accepting their condolences for having carried such a burden for so long. The financial documents told a story that seemed clear and straightforward. Marcus's paychecks had funded their mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, and daily expenses. His 401k contained their retirement savings. His name was on the deed to their house, and his investment account held their stock portfolio. Elena had no equivalent documentation to present, no evidence of independent income or personal assets. Judge Hendricks found herself feeling sympathetic toward Marcus as the first day of proceedings concluded. The evidence suggested a hard-working man who had provided generously for a wife who had contributed primarily through domestic duties. While such arrangements were not unusual, they did create obvious complications when marriages ended. The judge made mental notes about ensuring Elena received fair spousal support, given her apparent lack of work experience and marketable skills. Elena remained silent throughout the proceedings, speaking only when directly addressed by the court. Her responses were brief and soft-spoken, reinforcing the impression that she was overwhelmed by the legal complexity surrounding her. She appeared to be exactly what Marcus described, someone who had lived a sheltered life, protected from the harsh realities of earning a living in the competitive world outside their comfortable marriage. As the courtroom emptied at the end of the first day, Elena gathered her simple purse and the small notebook she had been carrying. Marcus's confident laughter echoed through the hallway as he discussed dinner plans with his legal team, already celebrating what seemed like an inevitable victory. Elena walked past them silently, her eyes fixed on the floor, looking every bit like a woman who had just realized how unprepared she was for the battle ahead. But as Elena reached the courthouse steps, something flickered across her face for just a moment. The briefest hint of a smile, gone so quickly that anyone who noticed might have dismissed it as a trick of the late afternoon light. She pulled out her phone and typed a short message, her fingers moving with surprising speed and precision across the screen. The response came immediately, and Elena read it with the same unreadable expression she had maintained throughout the day. Tomorrow would bring new testimony, new evidence, and new opportunities for Marcus to demonstrate his complete understanding of their financial situation. Elena folded her hands around her phone and walked toward the parking garage, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind her, Marcus was still talking, still confident, still completely unaware that the quiet woman he had dismissed for 15 years was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. The second day of proceedings began with Marcus striding into the courtroom like a general preparing for a victory parade. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor with each confident step, and his $1,000 suit fit him perfectly as he took his place at the plaintiff's table. The stack of financial documents before him represented what he considered irrefutable proof of his singular contribution to their marriage's wealth. Marcus's attorney, David Sterling, opened the morning session with a presentation that painted Elena as someone who had contributed absolutely nothing of value to their 15-year partnership. Sterling gestured toward the meticulously organized exhibits as he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone who believed completely in his client's version of events. Mrs. Chun has lived a life of comfort and leisure, he declared to the court, supported entirely by Mr. Chen's hard work and financial acumen. The financial records told a story that seemed devastatingly clear. Marcus had methodically prepared evidence showing that every major asset in their marriage bore his name alone. The deed to their $2 million home in Palo Alto listed Marcus Chun as the sole owner. The mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance expenses had all been paid from accounts controlled exclusively by him. Insurance policies, investment portfolios, and retirement accounts reflected the same pattern of singular ownership and control. Sterling presented bank statements dating back to the beginning of their marriage, each one showing deposits from Marcus's employer and no corresponding income from Elena. The checking account they used for daily expenses had been funded entirely by Marcus's salary, and Elena had been granted access only as an authorized user with spending limits Marcus had established. Credit card statements showed purchases that Sterling categorized as personal luxuries Elena had enjoyed without contributing to their cost. Elena sat motionless during this presentation, her simple notebook open in front of her as she wrote what appeared to be random observations. Her handwriting was neat and precise, but the content seemed to consist of disconnected thoughts rather than coherent legal strategy. Observers in the courtroom gallery noticed her occasionally glancing at her phone, which would light up briefly before she quickly turned it face down on the table. Judge Hendricks listened carefully as Sterling outlined Marcus's demands for the division of their assets. Given that Mrs. Chun contributed no income during their marriage, Sterling argued, Mr. Chun was requesting to retain 75% of their accumulated wealth. This arrangement, he claimed, was not only fair but generous, considering that Elena would be receiving assets she had played no role in creating. Marcus nodded approvingly as his attorney spoke, his expression radiating the satisfaction of someone who had planned meticulously for this moment. He had spent months organizing documentation that would demonstrate his complete financial responsibility for their household. Every piece of evidence supported his central argument that Elena had been a passenger in their marriage rather than a partner. The morning's testimony included several of Marcus's colleagues who spoke about his professional accomplishments and the long hours he dedicated to advancing his career. They described him as someone who frequently worked late into the evening and often brought projects home on weekends. When asked about Elena, they mentioned seeing her occasionally at company social events, where she appeared pleasant but unremarkable, someone who seemed content to remain in the background while Marcus networked with important clients and industry leaders. Sarah Kim, Elena's attorney, made several objections during Sterling's presentation that seemed half-hearted at best. When she questioned the completeness of the financial documentation, Marcus laughed audibly and whispered something to Sterling that made both men smile. Sterling dismissed Kim's concerns as desperate tactics employed by someone who knew her client had no legitimate claim to assets she had never helped create. The testimony from Marcus's friends proved particularly damaging to Elena's position. They painted a picture of Marcus as an incredibly generous husband who had provided Elena with every luxury imaginable. They spoke about the expensive vacations Marcus had funded, the designer clothing he had purchased for her, and the comfortable lifestyle he had maintained despite shouldering the entire financial burden alone. Their words carried the weight of people who had witnessed Marcus's generosity firsthand. One friend, Robert Kim, testified about conversations where Marcus had expressed concern about Elena's lack of ambition or professional interests. Robert recalled Marcus saying that he had encouraged Elena to pursue career opportunities, but that she seemed content to spend her days shopping, having lunch with friends, and attending yoga classes. According to Robert, Marcus had accepted this arrangement gracefully, never complaining about supporting someone who chose not to contribute financially. Elena's phone buzzed quietly during Robert's testimony, and she glanced down at the message before immediately deleting it. The action was so swift that most observers missed it entirely, but Judge Hendricks noticed the subtle change in Elena's posture afterward. For just a moment, Elena's shoulders straightened slightly, and her fingers tapped silently against her notebook in what might have been nervousness or anticipation. Sterling continued his methodical destruction of any claim Elena might have to their shared assets by presenting evidence of Marcus's individual accomplishments. He showed the court Marcus's performance reviews, which consistently rated him as an exceptional employee worthy of significant bonuses and stock options. The documentation included letters of recommendation from supervisors who praised Marcus's technical expertise and leadership abilities. The investment portfolio Marcus had built over 15 years reflected his careful research and strategic thinking. Sterling walked the court through each major purchase, explaining how Marcus had identified undervalued stocks and made decisions that had generated substantial returns. The portfolio's current value of over $3 million represented Marcus's skill as both an earner and an investor, achievements that had nothing to do with Elena's presence in his life. Marcus's confidence reached new heights as he observed Elena's apparent inability to mount any meaningful defense. She had produced no financial documents of her own, no evidence of income or assets that might complicate his straightforward narrative. Her attorney seemed reduced to making procedural objections rather than presenting alternative facts that might change the court's perception of their marriage's financial dynamics. As the morning session neared its conclusion, Elena raised her hand slightly to catch Sarah Kim's attention. She leaned over and whispered something that caused Kim to nod and address the court. "Your Honor," Kim said quietly, "my client would like to request a brief recess to make a quick call." The request seemed reasonable enough, the kind of small accommodation courts routinely granted to allow parties to consult with family members or check on children. Judge Hendricks granted the 15-minute recess, and Elena gathered her purse and notebook before walking quietly toward the hallway. Marcus watched her leave with a mixture of pity and satisfaction, commenting to Sterling that she was probably calling her sister for emotional support. His laughter followed Elena as she pushed through the courtroom doors, but he failed to notice the purposeful way she moved once she was out of his sight. In the hallway, Elena pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by memory. The conversation was brief, lasting less than 2 minutes. but her voice carried an authority that would have surprised anyone who had been observing her submissive courtroom demeanor. When she ended the call, Elena stood quietly for a moment, studying her reflection in the courthouse window. The woman looking back at her appeared unchanged, still modest and unremarkable, but something in her eyes suggested that the afternoon session might unfold very differently than Marcus expected. Sterling spent the final minutes before the recess ended reviewing his notes and preparing for what he expected to be a swift conclusion to the morning's devastating presentation. He had successfully established that Elena possessed no assets, no income, and no legitimate claim to the wealth Marcus had accumulated through his own efforts. The afternoon would bring the formality of Elena's feeble attempt at a defense, but Sterling was confident that Judge Hendricks had already seen enough evidence to make the appropriate decision. Elena returned to her seat with the same quiet composure she had maintained throughout the proceedings, but Marcus noticed that her notebook now contained several new entries written in the same precise handwriting. She had also rearranged the few documents in front of her, though they appeared to be the same unremarkable papers she had brought on the first day. As Judge Hendricks called the court back to order, Elena folded her hands in her lap and waited, her expression as unreadable as ever, for whatever would come next. Sarah Kim rose from her chair with deliberate slowness, her movements suggesting someone who was about to embark on a fishing expedition rather than present a coordinated defense. The legal pad in her hands contained what appeared to be hastily scribbled questions, and her demeanor suggested she was grasping for straws rather than executing a carefully planned strategy. Marcus watched her approach the witness stand with barely concealed amusement, confident that whatever questions she might ask would only reinforce his position. Kim's first questions seemed almost apologetically tentative as she addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Chun," she began, "during your 15-year marriage, would you say you were closely familiar with how your wife spent her days?" Marcus straightened in his chair, his response immediate and assured. He explained that he had always respected Elena's independence and hadn't felt the need to monitor her activities like some controlling husband might. His tone suggested that Kim's question revealed more about her desperation than about any gaps in his knowledge. The questioning continued along lines that seemed to play directly into Marcus's hands. Kim asked about Elena's daily routine, and Marcus described what he understood to be a typical schedule of household management, social activities, and personal pursuits. He spoke confidently about Elena's yoga classes, her lunch meetings with friends, and her apparent contentment with what he characterized as a relaxed lifestyle free from the pressures he faced in his demanding career. Marcus became slightly more animated as he warmed to the subject, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he had perfected over years of explaining Elena's limitations to anyone who would listen. He admitted, with what seemed like generous honesty, that he had never paid particularly close attention to the specifics of how Elena filled her time during his work hours. After all, he reasoned, his own responsibilities were sufficiently demanding that he couldn't be expected to track every detail of someone else's leisure activities. Kim shifted her approach slightly, asking about Elena's educational background in a way that seemed almost apologetic for bringing up what she must have known was a weak point in her client's qualifications. Marcus's response was swift and dismissive, explaining that Elena had earned some kind of computer degree from a local state school, but had never shown much interest in putting that education to practical use. His tone suggested that he viewed this academic achievement as roughly equivalent to a hobby rather than legitimate professional preparation. The mention of Elena's computer science degree prompted Kim to ask follow-up questions that Marcus answered with increasing confidence. He explained that Elena had occasionally mentioned wanting to do some kind of technology work, but had never demonstrated the initiative necessary to pursue serious employment opportunities. Marcus characterized these conversations as wishful thinking from someone who preferred the comfort of their current arrangement to the challenges of actual professional responsibility. Kim then introduced a line of questioning that seemed puzzling in its specificity. She asked Marcus about Elena's frequent coffee meetings, which Marcus had mentioned during his earlier testimony. His response was immediate and slightly condescending, explaining that Elena had always been social and enjoyed maintaining friendships through regular lunch and coffee dates. He seemed genuinely confused about why Kim would focus on such obviously innocent activities. However, When Kim pressed for more details about these meetings, Marcus's confidence wavered slightly for the first time. He admitted that he had never paid much attention to who Elena met with or what they discussed, assuming these were typical social gatherings among women who had time for such things during working hours. His dismissive explanation revealed that he had categorized all of Elena's outside activities as social rather than professional, without ever investigating the distinction. Kim reached into her briefcase and produced a small collection of business cards, holding them up for Marcus to see. She asked if he had ever noticed these items in Elena's possession, and Marcus squinted at them with genuine puzzlement. The cards were too small for him to read clearly from his position, but Kim's questions seemed to suggest they might represent something more significant than Marcus had realized. His response was uncertain, admitting that he had never paid attention to what Elena might keep in her purse or personal belongings. The business cards seemed to represent Kim's first successful challenge to Marcus's comprehensive knowledge of his wife's activities. When Kim asked if Marcus could identify the companies or individuals represented on these cards, his confident demeanor faltered slightly. He was forced to admit that Elena had never shared details about the people she met with, and that he had never considered such information important enough to investigate. Marcus's discomfort became more apparent when Kim began asking about their joint financial accounts, and whether he had noticed any recurring payments or transactions that he couldn't immediately explain. His initial response was defensive, insisting that he maintained meticulous control over their household finances and was aware of all significant expenditures. However, when Kim pressed for specifics about certain smaller, regular transactions, Marcus found himself unable to provide detailed explanations. The questions about unexplained financial activity seemed to catch Marcus off guard in a way that the earlier inquiries had not. He was forced to acknowledge that while he monitored their major expenses carefully, he had not examined every small transaction with the same level of scrutiny. His admission that some recurring charges might have escaped his notice was the first crack in his previously unshakable confidence about his financial oversight. Kim introduced the concept of Elena's consulting work with a question that seemed almost casual in its delivery. She asked whether Marcus was familiar with any freelance or consulting activities Elena might have pursued during their marriage. Marcus's immediate reaction was laughter, the kind of dismissive response someone might give to an obviously ridiculous suggestion. He explained that Elena had occasionally mentioned doing some kind of computer work for friends or neighbors, but he had always understood these activities to be hobby projects rather than legitimate business ventures. The characterization of Elena's work as hobby projects seemed to provide Marcus with renewed confidence, and he expanded on his explanation with obvious satisfaction. He described Elena's occasional mentions of helping people with their computers or websites as the kind of casual favors friends might do for each other. Marcus's tone suggested that he viewed these activities as roughly equivalent to helping neighbors with their gardening or providing recipe suggestions. However, Kim's follow-up questions about the scope and frequency of these projects began to reveal gaps in Marcus's understanding that he had not previously recognized. When she asked whether he knew how many clients Elena might have helped or how often she engaged in such work, Marcus was forced to admit that he had never considered these details worth investigating. His dismissive attitude toward what he considered Elena's hobbies had prevented him from gathering information that might have been relevant. Elena remained perfectly still throughout this exchange, her notebook open but her pen motionless above the page. Her expression revealed nothing about whether Kim's questions were proceeding according to plan or representing desperate improvisation. The subtle smile that might have flickered across her face during Marcus's most condescending responses was so brief that even careful observers might have dismissed it as imagination. Judge Hendricks found herself paying closer attention to Kim's questioning as the attorney continued probing Marcus's knowledge of his wife's activities. While the questions had initially seemed like futile attempts to find weaknesses in an airtight case, they were beginning to reveal a pattern of assumptions and oversights that might be more significant than they had first appeared. Marcus's growing defensiveness suggested that he was beginning to realize his confident dismissal of Elena's activities might have been premature. The business cards, the unexplained transactions, and the consulting work he had characterized as hobbies were starting to coalesce into a picture that didn't match his carefully constructed narrative. For the first time since the proceedings began, Marcus found himself wondering whether his comprehensive understanding of their marriage's financial dynamics might contain blind spots he had never considered. As Kim concluded her initial questioning and returned to her table, Marcus watched Elena with a mixture of irritation and uncertainty that replaced his earlier confidence. The quiet woman who had seemed so predictably passive was beginning to look less familiar, and the afternoon session that had promised to be a formality was starting to feel like something Marcus might not have prepared for as thoroughly as he had believed. Sarah Kim reached into her briefcase with the deliberate precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The manila folder she withdrew was significantly thicker than anything she had referenced during her earlier questioning, and the confidence in her movements suggested that the afternoon session was about to take a dramatically different direction than anyone in the courtroom had anticipated. The first document Kim placed on the evidence table was a corporate registration form that had been filed with the California Secretary of State exactly 12 years earlier. She held the paper up for the court to see, her voice carrying new authority as she read the business name printed across the top. EM Tech Solutions, Incorporated, she announced, founded and registered by Elena Marie Martinez Chun as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the words registered in his consciousness. The confident smile that had been his constant companion throughout the proceedings vanished instantly, replaced by a look of confusion that bordered on panic. He leaned forward in his chair, squinting at the document, as if staring harder might somehow change what was written there. The date on the registration form showed that Elena had incorporated her business just 3 years into their marriage, during a period when Marcus was certain she had been doing nothing more productive than decorating their first apartment. Kim continued her methodical presentation, producing additional corporate documents that painted an increasingly detailed picture of Elena's hidden professional life. Business license renewals appeared year after year, each one bearing Elena's signature and confirming the ongoing operation of a legitimate technology consulting company. The documentation revealed a pattern of regulatory compliance and professional responsibility that seemed impossible to reconcile with Marcus's characterization of his wife as someone who lacked business acumen or professional ambition. Sterling objected frantically, claiming that the documents could easily be fraudulent or recently fabricated to support Elena's desperate attempt to claim assets she had no right to possess. However, Kim was prepared for this challenge, producing certified copies with official state seals and timestamps that proved beyond doubt the authentic nature of Elena's business registration. The evidence was not only real, but had been properly maintained and updated according to legal requirements for over a decade. The next revelation struck Marcus like a physical blow as Kim presented federal tax returns filed under Elena's Social Security number that showed substantial business income dating back to the early years of their marriage. The tax documents revealed that Elena had been reporting consulting fees, software licensing income, and professional service payments to the Internal Revenue Service, while Marcus remained completely unaware of her business activities. Marcus found himself stammering as Kim asked him to explain how his wife could have been filing separate business tax returns without his knowledge, especially given his claims about maintaining complete control over their household finances. His response was incoherent, a mixture of denial and confusion that revealed the shocking depth of his ignorance about Elena's professional accomplishments. The man who had confidently testified about managing every aspect of their financial life was confronted with documented proof that he had been oblivious to a significant income stream that had existed throughout their marriage. Kim's presentation grew more devastating as she introduced client testimonials that praised Elena's innovative software solutions and technical expertise. The letters came from recognizable companies, bearing corporate letterheads that Marcus knew represented major players in the technology industry. One testimonial described Elena as a brilliant consultant whose custom database solutions had saved the client company hundreds of thousands of dollars in operational efficiency improvements. Another client letter detailed Elena's role in developing a proprietary inventory management system that had revolutionized the client's supply chain operations. The testimonial included specific technical details about Elena's programming expertise and problem-solving abilities, painting a picture of professional competence that was impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or favoritism. These were serious business communications from serious companies describing serious technical accomplishments. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably as the scope of Elena's hidden professional life became clear. Judge Hendricks found herself reassessing everything she had heard during the previous day and a half of testimony. The quiet woman sitting at the defendant's table was not the dependent housewife Marcus had described, but rather a successful entrepreneur who had been operating a thriving technology consulting firm for over a decade. Marcus watched in growing horror as Kim produced evidence of Elena's ongoing client relationships and professional reputation within the technology industry. The documents revealed that EM Tech Solutions had maintained contracts with multiple Fortune 500 companies, providing specialized software development and systems integration services that commanded premium rates in the competitive consulting marketplace. Elena's business had not been a casual hobby or occasional favor for friends, as Marcus had assumed. The evidence showed a sophisticated operation with formal contracts, project timelines, deliverable specifications, and payment schedules that reflected the kind of professional standards expected in high-level corporate consulting relationships. Elena had been competing successfully against established consulting firms and winning contracts based on her technical merit and proven track record. Kim presented email communications between Elena and her clients that demonstrated her authoritative command of complex technical subjects. The messages revealed Elena providing detailed guidance on database architecture, software integration challenges, and system optimization strategies. Her communications showed the kind of confident expertise that could only come from years of hands-on experience and continuous professional development in cutting-edge technology fields. The realization began to dawn on Marcus that Elena's frequent coffee meetings had not been social gatherings with friends, but rather client presentations and business development sessions with some of the most important technology companies in Silicon Valley. The woman he had dismissed as someone who spent her days in leisure activities had actually been building relationships and securing contracts that generated substantial income. Marcus's face turned pale as he processed the magnitude of his miscalculation. For over 10 years, Elena had been quietly building a successful consulting practice while allowing him to believe she was financially dependent on his support. The coffee meetings he had laughed about were client meetings. The computer work he had dismissed as hobbies were million-dollar consulting projects. The friends he thought Elena met for lunch were actually Fortune 500 executives seeking her technical expertise. Kim's presentation reached its crescendo as she revealed the full scope of Elena's professional achievements over the past decade. EM Tech Solutions had grown from a small startup operation into a recognized consulting firm with an impressive client roster and a reputation for delivering innovative solutions to complex technical challenges. Elena had built this success entirely through her own efforts while maintaining the facade of domestic dependency that Marcus had found so reassuring. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Elena had not been living off Marcus's paycheck as he had claimed. She had been operating her own successful business, filing her own tax returns, and generating her own substantial income, while Marcus remained completely oblivious to her professional accomplishments. The financial dependency he had assumed was revealed to be a carefully maintained illusion that Elena had allowed him to believe because it suited her purposes. Sterling sat in stunned silence as the foundation of his client's case crumbled before his eyes. The narrative of the generous husband supporting the unemployed wife had been completely destroyed by documented evidence of Elena's entrepreneurial success. The woman they had characterized as having no professional experience or business acumen was revealed to be a respected consultant whose expertise was valued by some of the most sophisticated technology companies in the world. Elena remained motionless throughout Kim's presentation, her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts or emotions. She had listened to Marcus testify about her lack of professional accomplishments without betraying even a hint of the successful business empire she had built in secret. Her ability to maintain such perfect composure while her husband publicly demonstrated his complete ignorance of her achievements suggested a level of strategic thinking that Marcus had never imagined his quiet wife possessed. As Kim concluded her devastating presentation and returned to her seat, the courtroom remained silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing. The confident man who had entered the proceedings certain of his financial superiority was confronting the reality that he had been married to a successful entrepreneur for 15 years without ever realizing it. The afternoon that was supposed to formalize his victory had instead revealed that he had been living a carefully constructed lie that Elena had allowed him to believe until this moment of reckoning. Sarah Kim returned to the evidence table with a banker's box that had remained unopened throughout the morning session. The weight of the container required both hands as she lifted it onto the table, and the sound of thick folders shifting inside suggested a volume of documentation that dwarfed everything presented thus far. Marcus watched with growing dread as Kim began extracting financial records that would soon reveal the true scope of Elena's hidden empire. The first document Kim presented was a comprehensive financial statement prepared by a certified public accounting firm that specialized in technology consulting businesses. The summary page showed that EM Tech Solutions had generated total revenue of over $50 million during its 12-year operational history. The number hit Marcus like a sledgehammer, causing him to grip the edge of the table as the magnitude of Elena's success became undeniably clear. Kim methodically walked the court through Elena's business banking records, revealing a sophisticated financial infrastructure that included multiple business accounts, investment portfolios, and cash management systems. The bank statements showed consistent deposits ranging from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars per month, representing payments from clients whose names Marcus recognized as industry leaders. Elena had not been playing with hobby projects, but commanding premium rates for enterprise-level consulting services. The revelation of Elena's separate banking arrangements struck Marcus with particular force because it exposed the carefully constructed nature of their domestic financial charade. While he had been managing what he thought were their household accounts, Elena had been maintaining an entirely separate financial universe that dwarfed his own assets. Her business accounts contained millions of dollars that had accumulated over years of successful consulting work, money that Marcus had never known existed. Kim presented a client list that read like a directory of Silicon Valley's most prestigious technology companies. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, and dozens of other industry titans had contracted with EM Tech Solutions for specialized consulting services over the past decade. The contracts revealed that Elena's expertise was not limited to basic computer troubleshooting, but encompassed advanced database architecture, artificial intelligence implementation, and cutting-edge software development that commanded the highest rates in the consulting marketplace. Marcus found himself recognizing many of the client companies as organizations he had always aspired to work with, but had never been able to approach successfully. The irony was devastating. While he had been struggling to advance his career as a mid-level software engineer, his wife had been providing strategic guidance to the chief technology officers of the most successful companies in the world. Elena had achieved the kind of professional recognition that Marcus had dreamed of but never attained. The documentation revealed that several of Elena's consulting projects had resulted in breakthrough innovations that had generated millions of dollars in value for her clients. One project involved developing a proprietary algorithm that had improved a major retailer's supply chain efficiency by 40%, saving the company over $20 million annually. Another project had created a security protocol that had prevented a financial services firm from suffering a potentially catastrophic data breach. Kim then introduced evidence that struck at the heart of Marcus's assumptions about intellectual property and innovation. Elena had filed numerous patents related to her consulting work, and several of these patents had been licensed to major technology companies for substantial ongoing royalty payments. The patent portfolio represented not just Elena's technical expertise, but her ability to create genuinely novel solutions to complex industry problems. The licensing agreements showed that Elena's innovations continued generating income long after the initial consulting contracts had been completed. Companies were paying her millions of dollars in annual royalties for the right to use technologies she had developed, creating multiple revenue streams that provided Elena with financial security far beyond anything Marcus had achieved through his traditional employment. Her patent portfolio alone was worth more than Marcus's entire net worth. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Kim presented video testimony from several corporate executives who had worked directly with Elena on major technology projects. The first video featured the chief technology officer of a Fortune 100 financial services company who described Elena as one of the most brilliant consultants his organization had ever engaged. He explained that Elena's database optimization work had improved their transaction processing speed by 60% while reducing operational costs by millions of dollars annually. Another executive testified that Elena had saved his company from a potential disaster by identifying critical security vulnerabilities in their customer data systems before they could be exploited by malicious actors. He estimated that Elena's intervention had prevented losses that could have exceeded $50 million and destroyed their reputation in the marketplace. The executive's testimony made clear that Elena's work involved life or death decisions for major corporations, not the casual computer help Marcus had imagined. The video testimonials revealed Elena's reputation within the technology industry as someone who could solve problems that stumped entire teams of highly paid engineers and consultants. Multiple executives described seeking Elena's expertise specifically because she had a track record of delivering innovative solutions where other consultants had failed. Her reputation for excellence had made EM Tech Solutions the consulting firm of choice for companies facing their most challenging technical obstacles. Kim's presentation took an even more shocking turn as she revealed the true financial relationship between Marcus and Elena during their marriage. Bank records showed that Elena had regularly transferred substantial amounts from her business accounts to their joint household accounts, effectively subsidizing their lifestyle with her consulting income. The comfortable standard of living Marcus had attributed to his own salary was actually being supported by Elena's hidden business success. The documentation showed that Elena's contributions to their household expenses had steadily increased over time as her consulting practice grew more successful. By the final years of their marriage, Elena's transfers were covering the majority of their mortgage payments, property taxes, and luxury expenses. Marcus had been living off his wife's income while believing he was supporting her, a reversal so complete that it redefined everything about their financial relationship. Marcus discovered that even his ability to maintain his current lifestyle depended on Elena's continued financial support. The house he had claimed as his own achievement was being paid for primarily through Elena's business income. The investment portfolio he had presented as evidence of his financial acumen had been funded largely through Elena's transfers rather than his own savings. His entire claim to financial superiority was built on a foundation of ignorance about who was actually generating their wealth. Kim presented Elena's personal financial statements prepared by the same accounting firm that had analyzed her business records. Elena's net worth exceeded $15 million, including business assets, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and intellectual property rights. Her financial position was not only independent of Marcus, but vastly superior to anything he had achieved through his own career efforts. The comparison between their respective financial contributions became even more stark as Kim revealed that Marcus's total lifetime earnings were less than Elena's income from just the past 3 years of consulting work. While Marcus had been proud of his steady salary increases and annual bonuses, Elena had been building wealth at a rate that made his accomplishments seem insignificant by comparison. His claims about supporting Elena financially were revealed to be not just wrong, but absurdly reversed from reality. Elena's patent royalties alone generated more annual income than Marcus's full-time salary, and her consulting fees continued growing as her reputation attracted increasingly prestigious clients. The woman Marcus had characterized as financially dependent was actually earning more in passive income than he made through active employment. Elena had achieved true financial independence while allowing Marcus to maintain his illusions about being the family breadwinner. Judge Hendricks found herself completely reassessing everything she had heard during the first day of proceedings. The case she had initially viewed as a straightforward division of assets between a working husband and dependent wife was revealed to be exactly the opposite situation. Elena was not only financially independent, but had been quietly supporting the lifestyle Marcus had claimed as his own achievement. Sterling sat paralyzed as the complete destruction of his client's case unfolded before the court. Every argument he had made about Elena's financial dependence was being systematically disproven by overwhelming documentary evidence. The woman they had characterized as contributing nothing to the marriage was revealed to be the primary breadwinner whose hidden success had enabled everything Marcus claimed to have accomplished on his own. As Kim concluded her devastating financial presentation, Marcus sat in complete shock, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. The confident man who had entered the courtroom certain of his financial superiority was confronting the reality that his quiet wife had built a business empire that dwarfed his own achievements while allowing him to believe he was supporting her. The revelation was so complete and so humiliating that Marcus seemed unable to process the magnitude of his miscalculation about the woman he had lived with for 15 years. Judge Patricia Hendricks removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on her desk, taking a moment to process the extraordinary reversal of circumstances that had unfolded in her courtroom over the past 2 days. In 23 years on the bench, she had presided over thousands of divorce cases, but she had never witnessed such a complete destruction of a plaintiff's fundamental assumptions about his own marriage. The evidence presented that afternoon had not merely challenged Marcus's claims, but had revealed them to be so thoroughly wrong that they bordered on the surreal. The judge's voice carried a mixture of amazement and judicial authority as she addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Chun," she began, "the court is frankly astounded by your apparent complete ignorance of your wife's professional accomplishments and financial contributions to your marriage. The evidence presented today suggests that you have been living in a state of willful blindness about the woman you shared a home with for 15 years. Your characterization of Mrs. Chun as financially dependent appears to be not merely incorrect, but precisely opposite to the actual circumstances of your relationship." Sterling made one final desperate attempt to salvage his client's position, rising from his chair with the frantic energy of someone trying to stop an avalanche with his bare hands. "Your Honor," he stammered, "even if Mrs. Chun did engage in some consulting work during the marriage, that doesn't necessarily change the fundamental dynamics of their financial arrangement. Perhaps she was simply helping friends with their computers, and the income was incidental to her primary role as a homemaker and dependent spouse." Kim stood to respond before Sterling had even finished speaking, her voice cutting through his desperate rationalization with surgical precision. "Your Honor," she said, "the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Chun generated over $50 million in revenue through her consulting business, filed separate tax returns for 12 consecutive years, maintained multiple business bank accounts, held patents worth millions in licensing fees, and regularly subsidized the household expenses that Mr. Chun claimed to be paying independently. This was not casual computer help for friends, but a sophisticated technology consulting empire that supported the very lifestyle Mr. Chun has claimed as his own achievement." Judge Hendricks nodded slowly as she reviewed the financial documents spread across her bench, each page representing another nail in the coffin of Marcus's credibility. The patent filings, client testimonials, bank records, and corporate contracts painted an undeniable picture of Elena as a highly successful entrepreneur whose hidden business had been the primary source of their family's wealth for over a decade. The judge found herself wondering how any person could remain so completely unaware of such substantial financial activity occurring under his own roof. For the first time since the proceedings began, Elena rose from her chair and addressed the court directly. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried an authority and confidence that seemed to come from an entirely different person than the quiet woman who had sat silently through 2 days of testimony. "Your Honor," Elena began, "I would like to explain to the court why I chose to keep my business success hidden from my husband and why I am only revealing the truth now." The transformation in Elena's demeanor was startling to everyone in the courtroom. Gone was the submissive posture and uncertain expression that had characterized her presence throughout the proceedings. In their place stood a woman who radiated the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of making important decisions and solving complex problems for Fortune 500 companies. Even her voice sounded different, carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in high-level business meetings. Elena explained that she had deliberately concealed her business success as a test of Marcus's character and genuine feelings toward her. "When I first started EM Tech Solutions," she said, "I was curious whether Marcus valued me as a person or simply enjoyed having someone he could feel superior to. As my business grew more successful, I realized that Marcus was much happier believing he was supporting a dependent wife than he would have been sharing a life with an equal partner. His consistent dismissal of my intelligence and capabilities told me everything I needed to know about his true feelings. The courtroom listened in fascination as Elena described how she had maintained the illusion of financial dependency while building her consulting empire. She had opened separate business accounts, filed independent tax returns, and conducted all her professional activities during hours when Marcus was at work or assumed she was engaged in social activities. Her ability to compartmentalize her professional and domestic lives had required careful planning and consistent execution over more than a decade. Elena's explanation continued with devastating precision as she detailed how Marcus's condescending attitude had actually motivated her to achieve greater success. Every time he dismissed my intelligence or suggested I couldn't handle real work, Elena said, I used that energy to win another major contract or develop another breakthrough solution for my clients. His belief in my incompetence became fuel for accomplishments he never could have imagined. I built my reputation in the technology industry partly to prove to myself that his assessment of my capabilities was wrong. Marcus sat frozen as Elena revealed the calculated nature of their financial arrangements throughout their marriage. She explained that she had deliberately transferred money to their joint accounts in amounts small enough to avoid triggering his curiosity, while maintaining the larger portion of her income in business accounts he never knew existed. The comfortable lifestyle he had assumed was supported by his salary was actually funded primarily through her consulting fees and patent royalties. The judge asked Elena why she had chosen this moment to reveal the truth about her business success, and Elena's response was both measured and devastating. I could have continued indefinitely allowing Marcus to believe his own fiction, she said, but his decision to pursue this divorce while claiming I contributed nothing to our marriage forced me to defend myself with facts. His public humiliation of me in this courtroom, his claims that I lived off his generosity, and his demand for 75% of assets I actually created made it necessary to set the record straight. Elena revealed that she had been prepared to end their marriage several years earlier when Marcus's dismissive treatment had become too painful to endure, but her attorney had advised her to document everything carefully in case Marcus ever challenged her right to the assets she had accumulated through her own efforts. The evidence presentation that had just destroyed Marcus's case had been years in the making, assembled as protection against exactly the kind of financial attack he had just attempted. The implications of Elena's revelation continued to unfold as she explained that several of her major clients had offered her employment opportunities that would have required relocating to other cities or countries. She had turned down these opportunities to maintain their marriage, sacrificing potential career advancement because she had hoped Marcus might eventually recognize and appreciate her professional accomplishments. His complete ignorance of her success had made those sacrifices meaningless. Judge Hendricks found herself revising her understanding of the case as Elena's testimony revealed the true power dynamics of their relationship. The woman Marcus had characterized as dependent was actually someone who had made substantial personal and professional sacrifices to maintain a marriage with someone who fundamentally failed to recognize her worth. Elena's decision to conceal her success had been a gift to Marcus's ego that he had never appreciated or acknowledged. Kim presented Elena's final piece of evidence, a comprehensive financial analysis showing that Marcus's total contributions to their household during their 15-year marriage had been less than Elena's income from her 3 most successful consulting contracts. The analysis demonstrated that Elena could have maintained their entire lifestyle independently, while Marcus's salary had been essentially supplementary to their actual household needs. His claim to be the primary breadwinner was not only wrong, but laughably reversed from reality. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive, reflecting the overwhelming evidence that had completely destroyed Marcus's credibility and claims. Given the evidence presented, Judge Hendricks announced, the court finds that Mrs. Chun is entitled to retain all assets associated with her business enterprise, including EM Tech Solutions, all related intellectual property, patent royalties, and business bank accounts. Mr. Chin's request for 75% of marital assets is not only denied, but revealed to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who actually created the wealth in question. Marcus's entitlement to any portion of Elena's business assets was rejected entirely, with the judge noting that his complete ignorance of her professional activities disqualified him from claiming any contribution to her success. The house he had claimed as his achievement would be sold, with Elena receiving the majority of proceeds since bank records showed she had funded most of the purchase price and mortgage payments. Marcus's retirement accounts and personal assets would remain his own, but they represented a tiny fraction of the wealth he had assumed he controlled. Sterling's attempts to appeal the judge's reasoning were dismissed before he could complete his arguments. The evidence was too overwhelming, the documentary proof too comprehensive, and Marcus's ignorance too complete for any legal maneuvering to change the fundamental facts of the case. Elena's business empire belonged to Elena alone, and Marcus's assumption that marriage entitled him to assets he had never known existed was legally and morally groundless. As the court session concluded, Marcus sat in stunned silence while Elena was surrounded by colleagues and business partners who had quietly attended the proceedings to support her. These were the people Marcus had assumed were Elena's social friends, revealed now to be fellow entrepreneurs, technology executives, and industry leaders who had known Elena's true professional status all along. Their presence highlighted how completely Marcus had misunderstood every aspect of Elena's life outside their home. The aftermath of the ruling continued to unfold in the courthouse hallway as Marcus's friends and colleagues who had testified on his behalf realized the magnitude of their mistake. They had publicly supported someone whose fundamental claims about his own marriage were completely false, and their embarrassment was compounded by the realization that Elena had been present during their dismissive comments about her capabilities. The woman they had characterized as dependent was actually more successful than any of them. Elena's business partners congratulated her not only on the legal victory, but on her decision to finally acknowledge publicly the success she had built through years of careful work and strategic thinking. Several mentioned consulting opportunities and expansion possibilities that had been waiting for her decision to step fully into the public recognition her achievements deserved. Elena's emergence from the shadows of her marriage promised to accelerate her business growth in ways that Marcus's presence had been unconsciously limiting. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Elena announced that EM Tech Solutions would be going public through an initial stock offering that would value her company at over $200 million. The technology innovations she had developed during her years of hidden consulting work had evolved into proprietary solutions that major corporations were eager to license and implement. Elena's transformation from secret consultant to publicly recognized technology entrepreneur was complete. Marcus, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild his professional reputation after colleagues learned about his complete ignorance of his wife's achievements. His inability to recognize Elena's capabilities raised questions about his own judgment and awareness that affected his credibility in business situations. The man who had confidently claimed superiority over his wife found himself trying to explain how he could have been so thoroughly wrong about someone he had lived with for 15 years. Have you ever wondered how many people in your own life might be hiding talents and achievements that would surprise you? Sometimes the quiet ones have the most interesting stories to tell. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Elena's incredible journey and whether you've ever discovered something unexpected about someone you thought you knew well. Stories like this remind us that assumptions about others can be our biggest blind spots. Elena's legacy extended far beyond her personal vindication as her company's success inspired other women to pursue technology consulting careers and challenge assumptions about their capabilities. Her patents continued generating substantial royalties, while her consulting firm became a model for building expertise-based businesses in competitive markets. The woman Marcus had dismissed as intellectually limited had created innovations that would influence technology development for decades to come, while Marcus remained frozen in the middle management position where Elena's hidden support had allowed him to become complacent about his own career development.